So this is diving back into the conversation that we were having while discussing the root, and that goes into how Ren was being charged for what happened during the Grail War in Fate Stay Night. As the overseer of the land, she was being charged as the one who opened a gate to the root. But what I really wanted to give more focus to here is her statements about her entertaining the idea of fighting against it, or even going on the run if she had to. She says there were heads of every department along with the Magi who wanted the Tosaka's family rights. Once I'd been sentenced, it was more of a circus than a trial. Oh man, I guess this is it for me. I should run to the Middle East where they're against the association, or fight until the very end in Japan. I was determined and was even making my escape plans, but there were people that wanted to save me while there were people who wanted to kill me. And in that very video, I talked about how Zelrech was the one that stepped in and saved her. He ended up getting the charges dropped against her, and I said, what if Ren really went on the run from the Mages Association? And that's exactly what this is. What does that look like realistically? Because we know how extremely hard that will be, considering the hand that the association has over several portions of the world that she's familiar with. So I started to shift between different ideas of where she would get her start and where she would possibly end up. At the time that this was happening, Ren mentioned that she had already went overseas. So she's already made her way into the clock tower, and it will more so take place around the time of Case Files. Ren does get a lot more exploration there in regards to her future self, but of course it is going by the El Malloy timeline. In this timeline, she's around 20, and when we meet Ren, one of the first things that we find that she's doing is that she's out in Singapore, and she's using her powers and her knowledge to scavenge sunken ships, get the treasures out, and sell them for bread. So this idea of whether or not Ren would be capable of doing this and capable of living on her own, it isn't just an exaggeration. We've seen hints of her doing this already, and this is just one of them. So she definitely knows how to move. The greater issue would be the borrowing of the resources in regards to the association and whatnot. But we can see right here, she's very self-sufficient. We also know that she's very intelligent. Now, I myself have never regarded her as one of the smartest people that we have, but she's definitely well above average. And she's also been regarded as a genius in text anyway, regardless of what I feel about it or not. Her and Luvia, in multiple scenarios, whether that be El Malloy, Strange Fate, or Prisma Ilya, Ren is often at the head of some type of tactical get down. I mean, I vividly remember when they were talking about taking down Darius, everybody was sitting at the table gathered around her, gathered around Ren, because she was the one that was laying everything out. I said in the video that her going on the run will probably get her some type of ceiling designation, or put her in alignment of somebody with one, like Toko, for example. So she might end up with Toko, and that would put her on the other side of the spectrum with characters from the Kara no Kyokai world, and possibly even characters from the Tsukihime world. The reason why I bring up Tsukihime is because after the fact, I remember in particular Tsiah was in the exact same situation as Ren after she had turned into an apostle. Had a whole video going over this. Tsiah also defected from Atlas. She couldn't live with herself knowing what she was, so she's on the run from the church and the association, and that's why we ended up fighting against Tsiah in the early portions of the Melty Blood manga, because she's been trying to hunt her down for a while. We also have to take into account a lot of the ages and how they also will be going through their transition in regards to their EOS state. Like Waver, for example, we know that Waver is years older than Ren. While Ren is 20 around the time that she goes to the clock tower, Waver is already 29 going on 30. And the class that Waver teaches, which is fundamentals anyway, will be one of the first classes that she has when she enters the clock tower. So by this point in time, she would have already been a student of Waver, and she would have already met him and most likely had some type of relationship with him before that has to get cut off. As a matter of fact, considering the way that they met in the El Malloy timelines, I could see her ending up as one of the cases that Waver has to deal with him being in his position. So that would be a natural way to bring him into the story and also be at odds with Rin because she has now fine-tuned her ways to living this new lifestyle. Now, at heart, we know that Rin truly has no malice towards these characters. Honestly, even the worst of her character across these timelines isn't that bad if you compare them to others. So I wouldn't say that there would be a dramatic shift in her identity. She would definitely feel bad that she would have to be going against the people that she once stood with. I could see a sentiment of a borderline existential crisis taking root because that's something that she's never had to deal with on that level. And by the time that she's finally rooted in it, it can only get worse because you're going to have people like Shiro more than likely trying to chase her down after he finds out what's going on, especially since she's the one that brings him to the clock tower anyway to study with her. So he's gonna be like, well, I'm here with you, so what's going on? Unless he defects with her and he just supports her wishes. Now naturally, she's not gonna make him go and she's gonna tell him to stay put and he's gonna follow her anyway. I feel like that's just normal for both characters. So either circumstance could work for something good right there. When it comes to the other worlds, for Toko, if you remember when Rin and Sakura was going down the alleyway to pick up Shiro's new puppet body after he lost his original, we see Toko there and you see how the adaptation is very intentional, that they make her presence known, but it doesn't appear as if she's just readily accessible to anybody. And that's on purpose because at this point she's on the run. So whatever she has to do, she's got to do it and she's got to go. That wasn't the focus for Rin at the time. She was trying to make sure that Sakura's okay. She's trying to make sure Shiro's okay. She's trying to handle her position as the overseer of the land. She's got a lot on her plate right now. And even when they pulled this off, you know, her getting the body for Shiro was never free. They ended up selling some of the valuable books that the Matos had as part of the funding to buy his new body. Even if it's just in passing, the fact that she was able to connect with Toko, who is very good at hiding out, by the way, just shows that she could get the job done depending on the timeline. Now, in the case of El Malloy, we know that Toko had this sealing designation revoked, and then she ended up getting one again. And the reason they revoked it is because she was a Grand. So she gets Grand status and then she gets the designation again. They let you off the hook and then you put yourself back on again. You gotta love it. In this case, I'm looking at the idea where she's still running the agency that does these mysterious cases like usual, and Rin gets into contact with her to see if she can get some more work, which in this case would not only help her extend her knowledge as a magus, but she could also keep it under wraps. Now, considering that Rin has now went in an alternate direction, one of the biggest points of her life will always be following the wishes of her father. That doesn't necessarily change by normal circumstance. So even in this scenario, I would imagine that Rin would still be making those strides to do what her father wanted. She would just have to make a lot of detours in the process. But this most certainly could evolve into something else entirely, because as I mentioned before, she's gonna have to cut ties with everything and everybody she's known. She could start that way, but that's not to say halfway through the process she couldn't change her opinion on it, because it's not sounding as enticing as it did when she first got things off of the ground. Again, this is just one scenario. In the case of her working with Toko, this also means that she's probably going to be working with Toko's other subordinates, and naturally one of those is Ryogi. And so I can see here that we may possibly be getting a Ryogi Rin timeline. The thing with this is that Ryogi and Rin are two dominant personalities. At this point in time, if Rin's 20, then Ryogi is around 27-ish. Because you have to remember, Kara no Kyokai takes place way before the events of Stay Night. These are still characters that predate her. So a lot like the Waver situation, where he's way older than her, Toko's way older than her. In the events of Kara no Kyokai, Ryogi was already 19, and Kara no Kyokai takes place in 99. So if we say this is 2007, she's a lot older, but also the dominance in their personalities could have caused friction at a point where Ryogi was still trying to understand herself if she had still been around the same age as Rin. But given the fact that she's got a lot of years, she's come to an understanding with her own path in terms of these existential ideas. As a matter of fact, she might be the person to guide Rin if her opinions start to go left, because she's kind of already dealt with those traumas. Now, I won't say the personality disorder is the same as bar for bar what Rin is going through, but there's definitely a hint of that being there with her trying to understand, should she remain in that place in the world, and is it still even worth her doing so? If Cheryl is still present, the narrative won't be as powerful because she naturally won't be as bitter. She'll still have him giving her support. But if he doesn't decide to come with her, then she's out here by herself. I can see this after a while starting to take a toll on her. And also, by this point in time, Ryogi is a mother. If people don't know, Ryogi has a daughter, Mana Ryogi. And by the time of these years, Mana will be what, 6 years old? Because we know in the time skip, Mana is already 10 years old, or around so. And she's literally in the El Malloy timeline. So it's not even a stretch. Waver already met her. So yeah, she's got a 6-year-old daughter. Her personality used to be way more off the rails, but she's had Mikia around to simmer her down. I could see that guidance working really good for her, at least with what she has left for what she's trying to build. As far as Sion goes, Melty Blood takes place around 2001, which would mean Sion also would be a couple of years older than Rin, but still in the same age bracket, more so than everybody else. And one thing that I remembered was her involvement with the Back Alley Alliance. And if you haven't seen the Back Alley Alliance, it is a group that got formed when she defected. Satsuki from the Tsukihime world, and also White Lin, depending on the version, and Rice Bife Stryberg, who is alluded to being a head of the same school that Toko went to. In this timeline, we can just assume that Rice didn't make her sacrifice, so she's still around, and Rin might just end up under Wallachia, which could actually make his efforts of reaching the 6th hypothetical factor in Melty Blood come true. And then you have a whole nother story. A congregation of heroines forced to live in the back alleys. Right now, Satsuki and Sion are the only official members, though sometimes White Lin stops by as well. In Tsukihime, back alleys were a terrifying place full of corpses, where girls that should have been dead chased you down and cornered you, and classmates hid their blood-drenched arms. However, it seems that ever since the Alliance was founded, safety in the alleyways has improved remarkably. So if she doesn't go the direction of Toko, she can always end up with Sion in the Back Alley Alliance. In that scenario, it would likely take her to a place of meeting with Tono, and then it really starts to get into an area of a Fate Suki crossover, though I will admit this is probably not the way that everybody imagined it, but with Melty Blood taking place in the Tsukihime worlds and everybody being connected to each other, it's kind of hard for them not to eventually meet. Now, we already saw how that meeting ended up in the fan manga. In this case, I don't think it would be anything like that, because these characters would be slightly older and their mental will be in a completely different place. The objectives would also be in a completely different place, as well as the people that are present. There's not going to be any Heracles to cause any friction when they first meet up to begin with, so a lot of that is going to be pushed off to the side. In this case, the whole scheme for the Alliance existing is that all these characters have this odd situation that keeps them out of the public eye. Hence the name. And they were all good people with completely different intentions, but they had to shift their lives around once that occurred. Except Lin, her situation is different. In this case, Rin isn't a vampire. So unless a new player enters the field and turns her into one and gives her a better reason to be involved, she could still be present, but I feel like she would also operate as the same position that she had in El Malloy, more so as a consultant, or more so as the person that's doing the operations for the group, so they don't have to give much focus to it. And considering the knowledge and the connections that Sion has, I mean, she was on the run for several years and technically still never got caught. It would be a very beneficial exchange, and it would make sense for them to have this mutual relationship. We could have the circumstance where both of the groups come together and then they all all work together and they do some type of joint missions. So it would be Satsuki, Sion, Ryogi, Toko, and Rin. This could also lead into some very interesting dynamics. There's a lot of different ways that you could spread it, but just going off of what we know, it's definitely possible. And this isn't even regarding what she said about the East, which could comprise of a completely different video. We know that she could pull it off, but would it be worth it and how would things change?